The city of New York was alive even at midnight. Its heartbeat was made of restless engines, the clatter of subway trains far beneath the streets, and the occasional blare of a taxi horn echoing off tall buildings. In Brooklyn, however, the world looked different. There were no shimmering skyscrapers or red carpet events, only narrow streets, broken sidewalks, and corner stores that stayed open late because someone always needed a pack of cigarettes or a loaf of bread. On one of those streets stood a small garage with peeling blue paint and a flickering neon sign that read Johnson Auto Repair. The sign buzzed and blinked, sometimes shutting off entirely, but it had been there for nearly 2 decades. The garage itself looked weary, as if it carried the weight of every car that had ever limped into it, begging for another chance at life. Inside, bent over the hood of a dented yellow cab, was Derek Johnson. At 29 years old, Derek's back already ached like that of a man twice his age. His hands were permanently darkened with grease and oil, no matter how many times he scrubbed them. His work shirt, once white, was stained black and brown, its fabric clinging to the broad shoulders and strong arms that had grown used to lifting engines and wrestling with bolts. To a stranger, Derek looked like just another mechanic, but to those who knew him, he was more than that. He was the man who could fix anything that had wheels and an engine. He was the man who never gave up, no matter how hopeless the job looked. And most importantly, he was the man who had sacrificed his own dreams so his family could survive. Derek's world. Derek had grown up in this neighborhood. He remembered playing basketball on cracked courts, dodging broken glass on the sidewalks, and running home quickly when sirens wailed in the distance. His father had disappeared when he was just 10, leaving his mother, Lillian, to raise him and his younger brother Marcus alone. Lillian worked in a chemical factory, long shifts that paid little but stole much, her health. By the time Derek was 16, her lungs had grown weak, and the doctor's words had burned themselves into his mind. If she keeps working, she won't make it another year. So, Derek quit high school. He picked up shifts at the garage, learning quickly from an old mechanic named Walter, who treated him like the son he never had. Derek had a gift for machines. He could listen to an engine cough and know exactly where it hurt. Walter used to joke, "This boy's got oil in his veins instead of blood." But while Derek fixed cars, he also carried the weight of his family. Marcus, brilliant and full of dreams, wanted to be an architect. Derek had sworn his little brother would go to college even if it meant Derek himself never set foot in a classroom again. So he worked, day and night, rain or shine. Each paycheck went to medical bills, rent, groceries, and Marcus's tuition fund. The only thing Derek allowed himself was the dream that one day, maybe, the world would recognize him for more than just a man in a grease-stained shirt. A friend's warning. That night, as the clock ticked toward midnight, Derek was still at the garage. He leaned over the cab's engine, sweat dripping from his forehead as he tightened the final bolts. Beside him, sitting casually on a stool, was his friend Luis. Luis was a truck driver, broad-shouldered and always quick with a laugh. He watched Derek with a mix of admiration and frustration. "Man, you're wasting your life here," Luis said, sipping from a bottle of soda. "You've got the brains, the hands, the instinct. You could be working for Boeing or some fancy company building jet engines. Instead, you're out here fixing busted-up taxis for people who can barely pay you on time." Derek chuckled softly, wiping his hands on a rag. "And how exactly do you expect me to do that? You think Boeing is going to hire a guy who never even finished high school? A guy who learned about engines by taking apart junk cars in his backyard?" Luis shrugged. "Maybe not, but I'm telling you, you deserve better than this." Derek leaned against the car, his tired eyes softening. "Don't mean nothing, Luis. The world doesn't give you what you deserve. It gives you what you fight for. And right now, I'm fighting for my mom and my brother. That's enough." Luis shook his head, but he didn't argue. He knew Derek too well. Once that man set his mind on something, no one could move him. Another world entirely. Across the city, in a gleaming penthouse high above Manhattan, Isabella Sterling was preparing for her night. She stood in front of a tall mirror, her figure draped in a silver gown that shimmered under the golden light of the chandelier. Diamonds glittered at her ears, and a platinum bracelet hugged her wrist. She looked every bit the heiress of Sterling Enterprises, one of the world's most powerful companies. But Isabella's beauty came with a weight she could never escape, the weight of her father's expectations. Charles Sterling was a titan of industry, a man who believed weakness was a disease. He had built Sterling Enterprises with ruthless ambition, and he demanded the same from his only daughter. Isabella had been raised not as a child, but as a successor. Tutors, business seminars, networking events. Her childhood was a blur of preparation. She had never known freedom, only responsibility. And tonight, responsibility called again. She was scheduled to fly to Dubai for a high-profile business summit. Billions of dollars were at stake, as was the future expansion of Sterling Enterprises. Her presence wasn't just requested, it was required. Checking her diamond-studded watch, Isabella frowned. Time was slipping, and delays were unacceptable. She snapped at her assistant, a nervous young man who scrambled to her side. "Make sure the jet is ready," Isabella said sharply. "I don't want a single delay. If something goes wrong, it's on you." The assistant nodded quickly, sweat forming at his brow. "Yes, ma'am, everything will be perfect." Isabella didn't smile. She didn't believe in perfection, only results. Trouble on the runway. At JFK International Airport, the Sterling private jet gleamed under the bright runway lights. It was a masterpiece of engineering, sleek and powerful, worth more than entire city blocks in Brooklyn. The crew prepared for takeoff, but just as the engines roared to life, a warning alarm pierced the air. Inside the cockpit, the pilot's face paled. "The auxiliary power unit is not responding," one mechanic shouted. "The fuel regulator's failing," another cried. "We can't get it started, ma'am," the chief engineer admitted when Isabella arrived at the scene minutes later. Isabella's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Do you have any idea how much is at stake tonight? Fix it!" The crew exchanged nervous glances. The problem was complex, and the resources were limited. It could take hours, maybe even days. The billionaire heiress felt her temper rising. She had been taught never to accept excuses, only solutions. And so, in desperation, the airport director made a call. There was only one man in the area with a reputation for pulling off impossible fixes, even if he wasn't certified for jets. Derek Johnson. The call. Derek was just about to close the garage when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, confused to see the number of the airport director. "Johnson," the man barked when Derek answered. "We've got an emergency at JFK. Sterling's private jet is grounded. If you can fix it, there's a paycheck in it for you. Big one." Derek froze, his mind racing. A billionaire's jet. That wasn't his world. But money was money, and his mother's hospital bills weren't waiting. "Send me the details," Derek said finally. He grabbed his toolbox, locked the garage, and climbed into his old pickup truck. As the city lights blurred past him, Derek whispered to himself, "It's just an engine. Doesn't matter how much money it's worth. It's just an engine." But deep down, he knew this night might change his life forever. Two worlds collide. When Derek arrived at the runway, the rain had started again, soft at first but growing heavier. His boots splashed through puddles as he carried his battered toolbox toward the jet. The crew stared at him with open disbelief. "That's the mechanic?" one whispered. "He looks like he works in a junkyard," another scoffed. Derek ignored them. He had faced worse. And then he saw her, Isabella Sterling. She stood at the foot of the jet stairs, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp as ice. Her gown sparkled under the floodlights, but her expression was harder than steel.
She looked like she belonged to another universe, one where people like Derek didn't exist. When Derek approached, she raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "You," she said, her voice dripping with disbelief. "They called you? Do you even know what kind of engine this jet has?" Derek met her gaze without flinching. "Ma'am, an engine is an engine. It breathes, it brakes, and it can be fixed. Doesn't matter if it's a taxi or a jet." The crew chuckled behind him, but Isabella's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Very well, impress me, but if you fail, don't ever show your face here again." Derek set down his toolbox, rolled up his sleeves, and said quietly, "Let's see what she's hiding." And with that, the battle between two worlds began.
The rain poured harder now, as though the heavens themselves wanted to test Derek Johnson. The runway gleamed with water, reflecting the harsh white lights above. The private jet looked less like a machine and more like a silver beast refusing to wake from slumber. Derek crouched beside the belly of the aircraft, his eyes scanning the panels, rivets, and seams. He had never worked on a luxury jet this close before. He knew cars inside and out, had repaired trucks and even motorcycles with engines that were barely holding together. But this was a challenge of a lifetime. Still, he wasn't afraid. He touched the metal gently, the way a doctor examines a patient. "Talk to me," he muttered under his breath, as if the machine could hear him. Then, with quick precision, he reached for his wrench. The crew around him exchanged doubtful glances. One muttered, "This guy's wasting our time." Isabella stood a few feet away, her heels clicking against the wet asphalt as she shifted him patiently. She watched him like a hawk, every movement judged, every pause criticized. To her, this man didn't belong here. He was out of place, a grease-stained mechanic in a world of billion-dollar assets. Finally, she snapped, "Well, are you going to fix it or just stare at it all night?" Derek didn't look up. His hands were already moving, loosening a panel. "Patience, ma'am. Rushing engines only makes them angrier." Isabella's lips parted slightly in surprise. Did he just compare her father's private jet, a marvel of modern technology, to some stubborn car engine? The audacity! A clash of words. As Derek opened the panel, sparks of frustration flared in Isabella's chest. She had dealt with CEOs, politicians, and power brokers, people who bent under her authority. But this man? This mechanic? He wasn't afraid of her, wasn't impressed by her name or her wealth. She folded her arms. "Do you even realize what's at stake? If I miss this flight, my company could lose billions in investments. Deals that take years to build will fall apart. People depend on me." Derek finally looked up, his dark eyes locking with hers. Rain dripped from his forehead, but his expression was steady. "People depend on me too, ma'am. My mother depends on me to keep her breathing. My brother depends on me to get through school. And right now, this jet depends on me to wake it up. So why don't you let me work?" The bluntness of his words struck her like a slap. Isabella blinked, caught off guard. For a moment, she had no comeback. Nobody spoke to her that way. Nobody dared. But Derek had already turned back to the engine, his hands moving with calm determination. Memories of sacrifice. As he worked, Derek's mind wandered briefly. The smell of oil and metal always carried him back to his childhood. He remembered being 12, standing on a crate in Walter's old garage, too small to reach the hood of the car, but determined to learn. He remembered his mother coughing late at night, trying to hide it from him. He remembered promising Marcus that he would see him graduate, no matter what it cost. Those memories fueled him now. Every twist of the wrench was for them. Every bolt tightened, every wire adjusted. It wasn't just work, it was survival. Isabella's perspective. From her spot under the umbrella held by her assistant,
Isabella couldn't look away from Derek. She told herself she was merely supervising, but deep down, curiosity gnawed at her. Who was this man who dared to speak to her without fear? His clothes were worn, his boots muddy, his hands rough. And yet there was something about the way he worked, focused, unyielding, almost graceful in its intensity. Isabella had grown up around men in tailored suits, boardrooms filled with polished words and fake smiles. But here was someone raw, real. Still, her pride wouldn't let her admit it. "If you break something," she warned sharply, "I'll make sure you never work in this city again." Derek smirked faintly without looking up. "If I break something, ma'am, you won't have to worry about me working anywhere. I'll be buried under this jet." Isabella's jaw tightened. He was insufferable. And yet, a tiny spark of amusement flickered in her chest before she quickly smothered it. Struggles begin. Derek's brow furrowed as he traced a series of wires deeper into the engine. The auxiliary power unit was dead, and the fuel regulator wasn't responding. He tried one method after another, his hands moving faster as minutes turned into an hour. Rain soaked through his shirt, chilling his skin, but he ignored it. The crew watched skeptically, muttering among themselves. One finally said out loud, "This isn't gonna work. We should call in a certified Rolls-Royce engineer. This man's wasting time." Isabella hesitated. Part of her agreed, but another, one she couldn't explain, wanted to see how far Derek could go. Against her better judgment, she said coldly, "No, let him finish." Derek didn't thank her. He didn't even look at her. He just kept working, sparks flying from the panel as he reconnected circuits. Inside, however, he felt the pressure. His heart pounded. He couldn't fail. Not here. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. Two childhoods compared. As Derek worked, Isabella found herself oddly restless. To distract herself, she thought of her own childhood, so different from his. She had never worried about rent or medical bills. She had grown up in mansions, attended elite schools, and traveled the world before she was 12. But those luxuries came with chains. Every decision had been controlled by her father. Every choice measured by how it would serve Sterling Enterprises. She envied Derek's freedom, even if it came with struggle. He could speak his mind. He could choose his own battles. Isabella realized with a strange ache that she had never chosen anything in her life. Her gaze shifted back to him. He was drenched, focused, and relentless, and for reasons she didn't understand, she felt something. The first spark. Suddenly, Derek cursed under his breath. A cable snapped in his hands, sparking dangerously. The crew gasped, and Isabella instinctively stepped back, but Derek didn't flinch. He tossed the broken wire aside, grabbed another from his toolbox, and began improvising a fix. "What the hell are you doing?" one of the engineers shouted. "Making her breathe again," Derek said calmly. Isabella found herself holding her breath as she watched. She hated it, hated how invested she suddenly felt. But when Derek's hands moved with precision, when his eyes burned with determination, she couldn't look away. By the second hour, Derek's shirt clung to his muscles, rain dripping from his jawline. His fingers bled slightly from a cut, but he wrapped it with tape and kept going. Finally, he exhaled deeply, leaning back. "All right, let's try her now." The crew exchanged wary looks, but the pilot climbed into the cockpit. He flipped the switches. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched painfully. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest. Then, the jet's engine coughed once, twice, and then roared to life. The sound was deafening, powerful, alive. The crew gasped in disbelief. Derek smiled faintly, exhaustion etched into his face. "She's awake," he said softly. Isabella's first crack. For the first time that night, Isabella Sterling was speechless. She stared at Derek, rain dripping from her diamond earrings, her lips parted. He had done it. Against all odds, against her doubts, he had succeeded. She felt something stir inside her, a mixture of admiration and something else she couldn't yet name. But pride wouldn't let her show it. So instead, she said coldly, "You got lucky. Don't think this means you're special." Derek chuckled, shaking his head. Luck had nothing to do with it, just hard work. And for reasons she didn't understand, Isabella Sterling couldn't stop staring at him.
The roar of the engine vibrated through the wet runway, echoing into the night sky. Crew members clapped each other on the back, some cheering in disbelief. A few of them even stared at Derek as though he had performed a miracle. But Derek didn't bask in their praise. He simply wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, his chest rising and falling from exhaustion. He had been working for nearly 3 hours in the storm, and though victory surged in his veins, his body screamed for rest. Isabella, however, wasn't clapping. She stood silently, her piercing eyes fixed on him, her mind racing. Isabella Sterling had always believed that competence was currency. That was how her father raised her. Either you delivered results or you were useless. And yet, standing there, watching Derek, the man she'd dismissed as a street mechanic, revive her jet, she felt something she wasn't used to: shame. She had judged him before he even began. She had doubted him, mocked him, threatened him. And now? Now he had proven her wrong. The thought unsettled her. She hated being wrong. But deep inside, beyond the pride and cold exterior, a crack had formed. "Job's done," Derek said, his voice steady but tired. He closed his toolbox, slinging it over his shoulder. "You're good to go, ma'am." Isabella raised a brow. "That's it? You're just leaving?" Derek shrugged. "What else is there? You got your jet? I got work tomorrow." There was no arrogance in his tone, no gloating, just a simple truth. And for reasons Isabella couldn't explain, his indifference stung. She was Isabella Sterling, billionaire heiress, CEO in waiting, one of the most powerful women in the country. Men usually scrambled for her attention. Yet here was this man, walking away from her without so much as asking for a reward. Derek paused, glancing back at her. Isabella hesitated, unused to the words forming on her tongue. You did well." It was the closest she could come to admitting admiration. Derek gave a small nod. "Thanks." Then he turned and walked into the darkness, leaving Isabella Sterling watching him with a strange, unsettled feeling. Derek stood there in his oil-stained coveralls, the scent of gasoline heavy in the air, his co-workers gawking at him as if he had just won the lottery. Isabella Sterling's presence in the garage was like a thunderbolt, sharp and electrifying, commanding everyone's attention. She looked like she belonged on a stage in front of flashing cameras, not in a run-down repair shop with tools scattered across the concrete. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she stepped closer, the gleam of the fluorescent lights catching on her diamond earrings. He tried to steady his breath. He wasn't used to this kind of spotlight, certainly not used to billionaires strolling into his world as though it was theirs to command. The other mechanics had already stopped working. pretending to be busy themselves but really just straining their ears, eyes wide with curiosity. "Mr. Johnson," Isabella said again, her voice smooth, the kind that held steel underneath velvet, "I have a job for you." Derek crossed his arms, feigning nonchalance that his pulse was quickening. "I already got a job, you can see that." A faint smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. "I'm not talking about fixing broken-down Hondas or patching rusted exhausts. I'm talking about something bigger." He frowned, suspicion threading through his tone. "Bigger how?" She didn't flinch under his stare. Instead, she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough so it carried a weight of secrecy. "A project, one that requires someone who doesn't just follow manuals, but understands machines. You proved that on the runway." Derek felt every pair of eyes in the garage burning into him. Walter, the shop's owner, gave him a look that screamed, "Don't mess this up." Derek wiped his hands on a rag, then shook his head slowly. "Whatever that was, it's done. You needed help, I gave it. End of story." Isabella tilted her chin upward, clearly unaccustomed to rejection. "You don't even want to hear the offer?" "Nope," he said flatly, turning back toward the car he'd been working on. A murmur spread among the crew. No one spoke to Isabella Sterling like that. The woman controlled corporations, bought out companies, and left powerful men trembling with a single phone call. But Derek treated her as though she was just another customer trying to push her way to the front of the line. She studied him, those calculating eyes narrowing. For a moment she almost looked insulted, but beneath it there was something else. Fascination. This man didn't bend. He didn't scramble. He didn't fall at her feet like the others. "Very well," she said after a beat, though her tone carried an edge. "But don't assume opportunities like this come knocking twice." Derek didn't respond. He tightened a bolt, his jaw set. Isabella lingered a moment longer before finally turning and walking out, her perfume trailing behind her like the last note of a song. The shop stayed silent until the sound of her car faded. Only then did Walter break it. "Boy, are you crazy? That was Isabella Sterling. Do you have any idea what kind of doors she could have opened for you?" Derek shot him a weary look. "Doors to what, Walt? Her world? That's not me. I got enough on my plate without dancing for billionaires." But even as he said it, he felt a tightness in his chest, a nagging voice whispering that he might have just walked away from something that could change his life. He shook it off and got back to work, but Isabella Sterling's image refused to leave his mind. That night, as he sat at the small kitchen table paying bills with trembling hands, his mother coughed in the next room. Marcus was at the counter, working through algebra problems by candlelight because the electricity had flickered out again. Derek rubbed his temples, the numbers blurring before his eyes. Every dollar was stretched so thin it felt like it might snap. And so, when a sleek black car pulled up outside the garage 2 mornings later and Isabella stepped out once again, Derek wasn't surprised. He had felt it coming, as though she wasn't done with him yet. This time she didn't wait for permission. She walked right up to him as he was checking a truck's suspension. "You turned me down the other day. I'll give you a second chance." Derek stood, wiping grease off his forearms, meeting her gaze with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "Second chance? You think I need you that bad?" "I think you need what I can offer," she countered smoothly. "Resources, money, stability." She glanced around the dingy shop, the cracked concrete floor, the outdated equipment. "This place is a cage. I can open it." Derek's jaw tightened. He didn't like the way she said it, as if his whole life was something pitiful that needed saving. Still, the words hit too close to home. He thought of his mother's medicine, Marcus's school fees, the overdue rent. He wanted to snap back at her, to push her away again, but the weight of his reality pressed down like a vice. "What exactly are you offering?" he asked, voice low.
A spark of victory flickered in her eyes, pulling a folded document from her handbag. A contract, private work. I have jets, cars, machines most mechanics wouldn't dare to touch. I need someone who can handle them, someone I can trust to work discreetly. And you think that's me? She knows it. The conviction in her tone unsettled him. He searched her face for mockery, for arrogance, but all he found was a fierce kind of certainty. "How much?" he asked finally. She smiled faintly. "It's more than you've ever made in a year for a fraction of your time." When he scanned the numbers, his breath caught. It wasn't just more, it was life-changing. Enough to cover every bill, every hospital visit, enough to finally give Marcus a shot at college without crushing debt. But the price wasn't just in dollars. He knew it. Tying himself to Isabella Sterling meant stepping into a world he didn't belong in, a world where he'd always be the outsider, the help. "I'll think about it," he said finally, and handed the paper back. Isabella arched an eyebrow. Most men would have signed on the spot. "I'm not most men." She gave him one last unreadable look before sliding the contract back into her bag. "You'll come around." She then left, just as abruptly as she had arrived. For the next few days, Derek tried to bury himself in work, but the offer gnawed at him. Every time he counted the dwindling bills in his wallet, every time his mother winced in pain or Marcus went to bed hungry, the number on that paper burned in his mind. Finally, late one evening after locking up the garage, he pulled out his phone and dialed the number she had left. The line picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Johnson?" Isabella's voice purred through the receiver, as if she had been expecting his call. "I'll take the job," he said simply. "I'll send a car for you tomorrow morning." And just like that, Derek's life veered onto a path he couldn't yet see, a path paved by engines and pride and the dangerous pull of a woman who had never been told no. The car arrived at dawn, a sleek black vehicle that looked absurd parked outside Derek's crumbling apartment building. Neighbors peeked through curtains as he climbed inside, wearing his cleanest work clothes, his heart hammering. The driver said nothing, only sped him through the city streets until skyscrapers gave way to a private estate sprawling across manicured acres. The Sterling mansion was less a home than a fortress, all glass and steel and sharp angles perched like a crown on the hillside. Derek swallowed hard as he stepped out, toolbox in hand, feeling every crack in his boots against the polished stone driveway. Isabella was waiting on the balcony, dressed in a crisp white suit that made her look untouchable, almost divine. She descended the steps with effortless grace, and for a moment, Derek felt as though he had wandered into a dream he didn't belong in. "You're late," she said, though her watch told him he was exactly on time. He smirked faintly. "Good morning to you too." She didn't smile, but something flickered in her eyes, the barest hint of amusement. "Follow me." She led him through the mansion, past chandeliers that sparkled like frozen stars, past walls lined with art worth more than he could imagine. Finally, they entered a cavernous garage that stretched longer than the street Derek lived on. Inside gleamed cars he had only ever seen in magazines, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, a Bugatti that looked like it belonged in another universe. And at the far end, her private jet engines gleamed under harsh white lights, disassembled as though waiting for him. "This," she said, gesturing, "is your new workshop." Derek's throat dried. He had never seen machinery like this up close, never imagined touching engines so advanced. It was intoxicating, terrifying, exhilarating all at once. "Why me?" he asked, his voice betraying a crack. Isabella turned, her expression unreadable. "Because when everything was on the line, when others failed, you didn't. You're not polished, you're not refined, but you're the only one who can do what I need." For a long moment they stood there, silence humming louder than any engine. Derek realized then that this wasn't just about machines for her. It was a test, a game, something deeper he couldn't yet grasp. And though every instinct screamed that stepping into her world would cost him more than he could pay, he also knew one.
The first days in Isabella Sterling's world were like living inside a dream that constantly reminded Derek it wasn't his. Every morning, a driver would arrive outside his building, neighbors gawking as if they couldn't understand what a man like him was doing inside a car that expensive. He would sit stiff in the leather seats, his calloused hands folded over his toolbox, watching as the city blurred past until the gates of the Sterling estate opened like the mouth of another universe. The garage was his kingdom, though it didn't feel like it. He walked among machines worth more than entire neighborhoods, machines so sleek and precise that every screw seemed touched by science beyond his reach. Yet when his fingers brushed against the cold steel, something awakened inside him. He could read engines the way others read books. He didn't need manuals. He listened, he felt, and the machines spoke back. Isabella watched him sometimes, standing in silence from the balcony above the garage. She never interrupted, never asked foolish questions like customers at the shop used to. She only observed, her gaze sharp as if trying to decode the mystery of how a man with grease-stained hands and worn boots could handle such masterpieces as though they were part of him. But Derek felt the eyes of others, too. The estate staff moved around him with thinly veiled disdain. The butler barely looked at him, the head mechanic whispered in corners, and the chauffeurs exchanged glances that said, "He doesn't belong here." And maybe they were right. Every time he wiped his brow with the back of his sleeve, he could feel the weight of his world crashing into hers. One afternoon, Isabella brought him into a room filled with documents, blueprints scattered across a mahogany table. She gestured for him to sit, but Derek remained standing, his eyes scanning the schematics of an engine unlike any he had seen before. "This is a prototype, a design that could change aviation. Faster, lighter, more efficient. But it's temperamental, unstable. The engineers I hired gave up. I want you to finish what they couldn't." Derek stared at the diagrams, lines and measurements twisting like puzzles. His first instinct was to laugh. He wasn't an engineer, just a mechanic who'd learned from trial, error, and instinct. But the longer he studied it, the more he saw patterns, flaws, possibilities. He could feel the engine inside his mind, pulsing, waiting to be corrected. "You're out of your mind," he muttered. "You think I can just walk in here and do what your fancy degrees couldn't?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "I think you already see the answer." And that scared him more than anything, because she was right. Days turned into weeks, and Derek poured himself into the work. He stayed late into the night, sketching, testing, adjusting. His hands bled from metal edges, his eyes burned from lack of sleep, but he couldn't stop. The prototype consumed him. The roar of the machines drowned out the nagging doubts in his head, the constant reminder that he didn't belong in this marble palace. At home, things shifted too. The money Isabella paid him flowed into overdue bills, into medicine that finally eased his mother's pain, into decent meals for Marcus. The boy's eyes lit up when he showed him new textbooks, and for the first time in years, Derek saw his brother smile without a shadow of worry. But with every dollar came a tether pulling him deeper into Isabella's world. She didn't just want his skill, she wanted his presence, his loyalty, his time. She invited him to dinners where men in suits spoke a language of power and profit he didn't understand. She pushed him to accompany her to events, not as a guest, but as something else, a puzzle piece she hadn't named yet. And people noticed. They whispered when she arrived with him at her side, their eyes sliding over his rough hands, his ill-fitting blazer. They wondered what he was to her. A project? A pet? A lover? Isabella never answered. She only kept him close,
her hand brushing his arm lightly, as if reminding him he was part of her design. One night, after hours of grueling work on the prototype, Derek slumped against the hood of a car, sweat dripping down his temple. Isabella entered silently, heels clicking against the polished floor. She studied him for a moment before saying softly, "You're killing yourself over this." He looked up, exhausted but defiant. "That's what it takes." "You don't have to prove anything to me," she said. His laugh was bitter. "Don't I? Everyone here thinks I don't belong. Hell, maybe they're right. But this engine, this is mine. If I can make it work, nobody can say I don't deserve to be here." For once, Isabella's mask cracked. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You think I don't know what it's like? To walk into rooms where they look at you and see only your father's name? To build empires while they whisper that you're just a spoiled heiress playing with toys? You fight with your hands, Derek. I fight with everything else. Don't think we're so different." Her words hung in the air, fragile and heavy all at once. Derek didn't know what to say. He had never imagined Isabella Sterling understood what it felt like to be judged, dismissed, underestimated. Yet the way she said it, the faint tremor in her voice, it was real. For the first time he saw not the billionaire, not the untouchable queen of glass towers, but a woman bound by chains no one else could see. And something inside him shifted. The following weeks blurred in a haze of work and tension. The prototype began to take shape under Derek's relentless hands. Each adjustment brought it closer to perfection, each test humming with the promise of something revolutionary. But as the engine grew stronger, so did the connection between him and Isabella. It was in the way she lingered near him, watching silently but with eyes that seemed to memorize every movement of his hands. It was in the late nights when they found themselves alone in the garage, conversations drifting from machinery to childhood memories, to fears they never confessed to anyone. Derek tried to resist it. She was his employer, his lifeline, his trap. Getting close to her meant risking everything, his pride, his freedom, his heart. But he couldn't ignore the pull. One evening, after Marcus had gone to bed and his mother was dozing peacefully, Derek sat by the window staring at the contract she had first handed him. He realized it wasn't just a deal anymore. It was a chain binding him to Isabella Sterling, a chain he had willingly clasped around his own wrist. And he wondered, not for the first time, if she knew exactly what she was doing all along.
The night of the first test flight arrived like a storm creeping across the horizon. Derek hadn't slept in 2 days, running diagnostics, tightening bolts, recalibrating until the numbers finally sang the way he needed them to. The hangar buzzed with energy, technicians rushing about, investors murmuring, the Sterling name looming over it all like a crown waiting to be polished. But all Derek could focus on was the machine sitting in the center of it all, sleek and defiant, the engine that had consumed his every waking hour. His chest tightened at the thought that if it failed, it wouldn't just be a broken prototype. It would be proof to everyone that he was nothing more than a mechanic who had strayed too far from his lane. Isabella appeared beside him, dressed in a tailored suit that glowed under the hangar lights. Her presence steadied him in a way he didn't want to admit. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly, as though the question was meant only for him. He wiped his hands on a rag, heart pounding. "Doesn't matter if I am. She's ready." For a moment, her lips curved into a smile, but her eyes carried something heavier. If this works, everything changes. Derek knew she didn't just mean for her company. She meant for him, too. The pilot climbed into the cockpit. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life with a sound that seemed to shake the ground itself. Derek held his breath as the jet taxied down the runway, its wings slicing the night air before it lifted, climbing higher and higher until it was a silver streak against the stars. The hangar erupted in applause, investors clapping each other on the back, technicians cheering. Derek exhaled slowly, his knees weak. It worked. It actually worked. But as the crowd celebrated, Isabella turned to him. There was no triumph in her eyes, only something unreadable, something private. She stepped closer, her voice barely audible over the roar of the jet circling above. "You did it. Not them, not me, you." For the first time in his life, Derek felt like the world saw him, not as a poor kid with grease under his nails, not as a charity case in a billionaire's empire, but as a man who had created something extraordinary. The jet landed smoothly, applause swelling again. Isabella touched his arm lightly, guiding him away from the crowd, into the shadows at the edge of the hangar. When they stopped, she turned to face him fully, her gaze unflinching. "I want you to stay." His brow furrowed. "Stay? I thought the deal was the engine. I built it. It works. My job's done." Her jaw tightened. "You think I brought you here just for an engine? Derek, I could have hired 10 men with twice the credentials, but none of them had what you have. You don't just fix machines, you breathe life into them, into people." He shook his head, uneasy at the intensity of her words. "You don't know what you're saying. You're caught up in the moment. Tomorrow you'll be back to your boardrooms and contracts, and I'll be back to—" He trailed off, unable to finish. "Back to what?" she pressed. "Back to scraping by while your family suffers? Back to a life where no one sees what you're worth? I'm offering you something bigger." Her eyes locked onto his, fierce and unwavering, and in that instant Derek understood this wasn't about engines or business. It was about her. She was offering him herself. His chest tightened. He wanted to tell her she was out of her mind, that billionaires didn't propose to mechanics, that their worlds could never mix without shattering. But the words caught in his throat because deep down he wanted it. He wanted her. Before he could speak, a commotion broke out behind them. A cluster of men in tailored suits approached, led by a tall, sharp-eyed figure Derek hadn't seen before. He moved with the confidence of someone used to owning every room he entered. Isabella stiffened immediately, her entire body coiling like a spring. "Father," she said, her voice cool and sharp. The man's gaze slid over Derek like he was invisible, before locking onto Isabella. "What is this circus? You let an untested mechanic tamper with our most valuable asset? You've embarrassed this family enough." Derek bristled, but Isabella stepped forward, her chin high. "He built what your engineers couldn't. Without him, there would be no flight tonight." Her father's eyes narrowed, finally acknowledging Derek with a look that sliced deep. "And what do you think you are? A hero? You're nothing but a tool my daughter picked up from the gutter. Don't mistake usefulness for worth." The words hit Derek like a fist. Every doubt he'd buried clawed its way back. Maybe he was nothing. Maybe he had no right to be here, standing beside a woman like Isabella Sterling. But before he could speak, Isabella's voice cut through the tension, fierce and unwavering. The night air clung heavy around the hangar, filled with the lingering scent of jet fuel and the echo of applause that had only just faded. Derek stood frozen, Isabella's hands still wrapped firmly in his, her father's glare cutting through the space like a blade. He had never felt more exposed in his life, and yet, beneath the weight of 100 watching eyes, there was a strange sense of clarity pulsing through him. Isabella's fingers didn't tremble. She held on as though her grip alone could anchor him, could shield him from the storm brewing in her father's gaze. Derek wanted to believe her strength was enough for both of them, but deep down, doubt gnawed at his chest. Could someone like him survive in her world?
Her father broke the silence first, his voice low and venomous. "You think this changes anything? A successful test flight doesn't make him worthy. It doesn't make him one of us." He gestured sharply toward Derek, his disgust plain. "Tomorrow the headlines will speak of sterling ingenuity, not the hands of a mechanic who doesn't even belong in the room." Isabella squared her shoulders, fire in her voice. "Tomorrow the headlines will speak of truth. If I have to write them myself, I won't let you erase him." Derek's stomach twisted. He wasn't used to people fighting for him, least of all someone like Isabella Sterling. For so long, he had fought his own battles, patched his own wounds, swallowed his own failures. But here she was, standing against the man who had built an empire, and she was doing it for him. Her father's face darkened, his voice laced with warning. "Be very careful, Isabella. You're treading a path that will burn you." She didn't flinch. "Then let it burn." The murmur of the crowd grew louder. Investors exchanged wary glances. Employees shifted uneasily. This wasn't the polished display of sterling power they had come expecting. This was something raw, something dangerous. Derek finally found his voice, though it was rough, hesitant. "Isabella, maybe we should talk about this somewhere else." But she shook her head firmly, her eyes never leaving her father's. "No, I won't hide what I feel. Not from him, not from them, not from the world." Her grip on Derek's hand tightened, grounding him. Then, before he could stop her, she said the words that shattered the last barrier between them and the watching world. "I love him." The air itself seemed to still, as though the hangar and everyone in it had turned to stone. Derek's heart slammed against his ribs, his breath caught somewhere in his throat. He had imagined 1,000 outcomes to this night, but not this. Never this. Her father's face twisted with fury. "You shame yourself. You shame this family." He turned his glare on Derek, a look that carried the weight of dismissal, of finality. "And you'll regret the day you ever stepped foot in my hangar." With that, he turned sharply and walked away, his entourage scrambling to follow. The crowd, unsure of what to do, slowly began to disperse, whispering feverishly as they slipped out into the night. Within minutes, the hangar that had been bursting with energy was empty, save for a handful of stunned technicians pretending to be busy themselves with equipment. Derek stood rooted to the ground, his pulse still hammering, his mind spinning. He looked at Isabella, who was watching him with eyes that held no regret, no fear, only certainty. "You didn't have to say that," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I wanted to," she replied softly. "I needed to." "But do you know what you just did?" His voice cracked, and he pulled his hand free, raking it through his hair. "You went against your father, against everything you've been raised to protect. For me? Isabella, I'm nobody." Her jaw set stubbornly. "Don't you dare say that. You're not nobody. You built something tonight that no one else could. You've carried burdens no one else even saw. You are more than worthy." Her conviction should have lifted him, but the weight pressing on his chest only grew heavier. He thought of his family back home, of the debts still unpaid, of the streets that had taught him to fight and survive. He thought of the gulf between their worlds, hers lined with gold and glass, his with grit and grease. "Isabella," he said slowly, "you don't understand what it's like to be me, to come from where I come from. People like me don't get to dream this big, and if we do, it usually costs us everything." She stepped closer, her voice gentle, but fierce. "Then let it cost us everything. I'm not asking you to become someone you're not. I'm asking you to stand with me, whatever comes." Her words hit something deep inside him, something he had buried long ago, under layers of survival and sacrifice. a part of him that still wanted to believe in miracles, in love, in a future that wasn't dictated by the circumstances of his birth. The hangar lights flickered, and for a brief moment the world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in that vast, echoing space. Derek reached out, almost without thinking, his hand finding hers again. "You're crazy," he murmured, a faint smile tugging at his lips despite the storm inside him. "Maybe," she whispered back, "but maybe that's exactly what we need." He didn't kiss her. Not yet. The moment was too fragile, too raw. But he knew, with a certainty that scared him, that something had shifted irrevocably. The line between their worlds had been crossed, and there was no going back. Outside, the test jet still gleamed under the night sky, a symbol of what they had built together. A machine that wasn't supposed to exist, just like the bond growing between them. Against all odds, it had taken flight, and so perhaps could they. For now, though, Derek simply stood beside her in the quiet aftermath, knowing that the real battle was only just beginning.